They sent him a shy mail-order bride. Her first night confession changed everything. James had lived alone for many years, and the quiet of his ranch in rural Texas had become both a comfort and a burden. His days were filled with routine, the gentle rhythm of feeding the cattle, repairing fences, and tending to the small vegetable garden behind the house. But the evenings were always long and lonely. The wide open land, which to some seemed peaceful and freeing, often reminded him of what he had lost. Since the passing of his wife several years ago, he had thrown himself into work, burying himself in chores and responsibilities, but the ache of loneliness never truly went away. Despite the solitude, James had a kind heart and a gentle nature. The neighbors often stopped by for a friendly chat, or to ask for help with a stubborn tractor or a fence that had fallen in a storm. Yet, even amidst these small social connections, he felt something missing, a companionship that went deeper than casual conversation, someone who could share the small victories and frustrations of life on the ranch. His family, well-meaning as always, had gently suggested that he consider finding a partner. At first, James had laughed it off. "I'm fine," he would say. "I have the ranch, the horses, and the cows. What more do I need?" But deep inside, he knew they were right. It was a late afternoon in early spring when James found himself sitting in the living room, a cup of coffee warming his hands, staring at the small laptop on the table. He had always been skeptical of the idea, but something had led him to start looking online, exploring the concept of a mail-order bride. He had seen the advertisements and read the stories in newspapers and online forums, but he never thought he would consider it seriously. Still, as he scrolled through pages filled with photographs and letters, a part of him allowed a flicker of hope. Could there really be someone out there who might understand him, someone willing to share a life that was both simple and challenging? The idea made him uneasy. James was a practical man. He liked things straightforward and real. Yet, as he read the letters from women seeking genuine companionship, he felt a strange pull. Many of them wrote about wanting to find someone honest and kind, someone who could accept them as they were. He realized that, perhaps, this could be a way to meet someone who shared his values and his lifestyle. He leaned back in the chair, thinking of what his parents and siblings might say if they knew he was seriously considering it. But in that moment, he didn't care about what anyone thought. All he cared about was the thought of ending his days in the quiet of the ranch with no one to share it with, or worse, with the company of a hollow routine and endless silence. James spent the next few days researching more carefully. He read articles, visited forums, and even reached out to a few agencies to ask questions about the process. He was careful, cautious, and skeptical, asking about the legal requirements, the safety measures, and the kind of commitment involved. He wasn't looking for a fantasy or a romanticized dream. He was looking for someone real, someone who could handle the realities of ranch life and the quiet honesty of his world. At night, he would stare at the stars outside his window and imagine what it might be like to have someone beside him, sharing the simple joys and the little hardships of life. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was small, neat, and had a stamp from another country. James felt a sudden jolt of curiosity. He carefully opened the envelope and pulled out a letter folded neatly inside. Along with it was a small photograph of a young woman. She had a gentle smile and soft eyes that seemed to look straight at him. Her name was Elena, and in her letter she wrote about her hopes and dreams, not just about marriage, but about finding someone who could be a true partner in life. She admitted her shyness and spoke honestly about her fears of leaving her family behind. The letter was humble, yet it carried a quiet strength that caught James by surprise. For the first time in many years, James felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. He read her letter multiple times, each time noticing something new, a word, a sentence, a hint of her personality that made her seem both fragile and strong. He looked at the photograph again and wondered what it would be like to meet her in person. Would she be as shy as she described? Would they get along? Could this letter and photograph possibly lead to something real, something that could change his life? He wasn't sure, but a part of him wanted to find out. James spent the evening pacing the living room, thinking of every possible outcome. What if she didn't like the ranch? What if the culture difference was too much? What if they simply didn't connect? Yet another thought kept rising to the surface. What if this could be the chance to find companionship, to share life with someone who could understand and appreciate him? He finally made a decision. He would write back, cautiously but openly, expressing his interest and his willingness to meet her. He wasn't promising love or a perfect match. He was simply offering a chance to meet, to see if there could be something genuine between them. Over the next few weeks, James and Alina exchanged letters. Each letter revealed more about her personality, her hopes, and her fears. She wrote about her small hometown, the simple joys she enjoyed, and her curiosity about life in Texas. James shared details about his ranch, his daily routine, and his past experiences. The letters were slow and careful, yet with each exchange, James felt a growing connection. He found himself smiling at her words, laughing quietly at her small jokes, and sometimes feeling a pang of anticipation as he waited for her next letter. One day, he received a letter that was different from the rest. It was short, hesitant, and full of emotion. Alina wrote that she had finally made the decision to come to Texas, that she wanted to meet him in person, and that she hoped they could find a way to build a life together. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that James could feel in his chest. He realized that in a few weeks, a shy young woman he had never met would be stepping off a plane and walking into his life. The thought was thrilling and terrifying all at once. James spent the days leading up to her arrival preparing. He cleaned the house, stocked the kitchen, and even fixed a few small things around the ranch that had needed attention for months. More than the chores, however, he prepared himself mentally. He practiced patience, reminding himself that first impressions mattered and that he needed to be gentle and understanding. He thought about the first conversation they would have, the awkward silences, and the nervous smiles. He hoped he would be able to make her feel comfortable, to show her that life on the ranch was not just work and solitude, but also a place where laughter, care, and warmth could exist. The morning of Alina's arrival, James stood at the small airport, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. He carried a small sign with her name, feeling slightly ridiculous, but he didn't care. As the plane touched down and passengers began to exit, his heart raced. And then he saw her, Alina, clutching a small suitcase, looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. She was exactly as she had described herself in letters, shy, cautious, but with a quiet strength that shone through her nervous demeanor. James took a deep breath, stepped forward, and greeted her warmly. "Hello, Alina," he said, his voice calm but welcoming. She smiled softly, a small gesture that immediately made him feel at ease. They introduced themselves properly, and for a few moments there was an awkward pause. Words seemed inadequate, but there was a shared understanding in their smiles and nervous glances. As they drove to the ranch, the conversation was slow and careful. Alina asked about the animals, the house, and the land, while James answered patiently, noticing how she listened intently, absorbing every detail. Despite the initial shyness, there was a spark of curiosity in her eyes, a desire to understand this new world she had entered. And James, despite his own nerves, felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps this could be the beginning of something genuine, something that neither of them had expected but both secretly desired. By the time they arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the wide fields and wooden fences. James opened the gate, and Alina's eyes widened slightly at the expanse of land before her. She was quiet, but her expression showed wonder and cautious excitement. James led her inside, offering her a tour of the house, showing her the kitchen, the living room, and the small bedroom that would be hers. She listened carefully, nodding politely, yet there was a subtle warmth in her smile that made James feel a little lighter. That evening they shared a quiet dinner together. Conversation was hesitant at first, but gradually they found a rhythm. Elena spoke softly about her journey, her hopes, and the little things she loved, while James listened, offering encouragement and gentle laughter. The night was calm, but there was an underlying sense that something had shifted. The letters, the preparation, and the anticipation had led to this moment. The first real connection between two people who had previously been strangers, yet who were slowly beginning to imagine a shared life. As the night drew on, James realized that the arrival of Elena had brought something into his life that he had not expected. Hope. Hope that companionship was possible. Hope that life on the ranch could be more than solitude and routine. And hope that in time, trust, understanding, and perhaps even love could grow in the most unexpected of ways. Elena's plane had barely touched the tarmac when James spotted her through the crowd. She clutched her small suitcase tightly, her eyes wide and curious as she scanned the terminal. Her shy smile appeared when she noticed him holding the sign with her name, and James felt a flicker of relief. The letters had painted a picture of who she was, but seeing her in person made everything feel suddenly real. She was just as she had described, quiet, polite, and clearly nervous, yet her eyes held a quiet strength that made him think she could handle this new life. "Hello, Elena," James said, giving her the warmest smile he could muster. She nodded, her small hand briefly brushing his in greeting. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried a polite confidence. "Hello, Mr. James," she replied. They exchanged a few polite words, both aware of the tension in the air. Neither wanted to appear awkward, yet both were acutely aware that their entire lives were about to intersect in ways they had never imagined. The drive from the airport to the ranch was quiet at first. Elena stared out the window, taking in the wide-open fields and the occasional cluster of trees. Her brow furrowed slightly as she tried to imagine herself living in such a place. "It is very different from home," she said softly. James nodded, glancing at her from time to time, unsure whether to fill the silence with conversation or let her absorb the new surroundings at her own pace. Gradually, small questions began to emerge. Elena asked about the cows grazing in the fields, the barns in the distance, and the wooden fences stretching across the horizon. James answered patiently, describing each detail with care, aware that she had never experienced this kind of life before. She listened intently, occasionally smiling or nodding, and he noticed the way she absorbed everything quietly, as if she wanted to understand fully before forming any judgments. When they arrived at the ranch, Elena's eyes widened at the sight of the wide property. The house was modest but sturdy, surrounded by green pastures and the distant outline of mountains. James opened the gate for her and gestured toward the house. "Welcome home," he said softly, her lips curved into a tentative smile. "It is beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. She stepped lightly onto the porch, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were trying not to disturb the balance of this new environment. Inside, James gave her a tour of the house. The rooms were simple but cozy, each filled with personal touches that reflected his life on the ranch. He showed her the kitchen first, explaining where things were and how he liked to cook. "You'll find everything you need here," he said gently, noticing her curious glances at the neatly arranged shelves. Elena nodded, clearly trying to remember everything, and asked a few questions about the appliances and tools she had never used before. Next, they moved to the living room, where a fireplace stood as the centerpiece. A few family photos adorned the mantel, including pictures of James with his late wife and younger siblings visiting the ranch. Elena looked at the photos carefully, her expression softening. She did not ask questions about them immediately, sensing the emotions behind the images, and James appreciated her quiet respect. Finally, he showed her the small bedroom that would be hers. The room was simple, with a neatly made bed, a small dresser, and a window overlooking the fields. She stepped inside and breathed in quietly, as if testing the air of this new space. Dinner was a cautious affair. James prepared a simple meal, one he hoped would be familiar enough to comfort her but also reflect the flavors of his home. They ate quietly at first, exchanging polite smiles and small talk. Elena asked questions about the ranch, about his work, and about the animals. James answered carefully, noticing the way she listened so intently. It was clear that she wanted to understand, to be part of this life, but she also wanted to do so respectfully and without imposing. As they ate, James noticed how carefully Elena handled each bite, how her eyes occasionally darted around the room, taking in every detail. She asked questions about small things he had never thought to explain, the way the kitchen utensils were arranged, the layout of the pantry, and even the small herbs growing in the windowsill. James smiled quietly to himself, realizing that her curiosity was genuine and thoughtful, not intrusive. After dinner, James suggested they take a walk outside to see the ranch at dusk. The sun was lowering in the sky, painting the fields with golden light. Elena followed him slowly, her steps tentative on the uneven ground. They walked past the cows, who looked up briefly before returning to grazing, and past the barns, which cast long shadows across the fields. "It is very peaceful here," Elena said softly. James nodded. "It is. Quiet, yes, but there is work to do every day." For a while they walked in silence, the only sounds being the wind rustling through the trees and the distant lowing of the cattle. Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she were starting to feel more at ease. She stopped and pointed toward a cluster of wildflowers near the fence. "They are very pretty," she said. James nodded, kneeling down to examine them with her. "Yes, they bloom every spring. I like to think they make the ranch feel alive," he said gently. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made James feel a little lighter inside. As the evening progressed, James led her back to the house. They paused at the porch, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the mountains. Elena looked out at the fields, her expression thoughtful. "It is so different from what I am used to," she said, "but I think I can learn. I want to try." James was moved by her words. Her willingness to adapt, to embrace the unknown, showed courage that he had not expected. "We will take it one day at a time," he said. "No rush. We can learn together." Later, as they returned inside, Elena asked if she could see the animals more closely. James led her to the barn, where the horses and cattle were settling in for the night. She approached the animals cautiously, but with a gentle curiosity that impressed James. She stroked the horses' manes and fed the cows small portions, asking questions all the while. James observed her carefully, realizing that her quiet demeanor hid a strong determination to understand and to belong. By the time they returned to the house, it was late, and the first hints of stars were appearing in the clear night sky. James suggested that they prepare for bed, sensing that the long day had been overwhelming for both of them. Elena nodded, and they went to their respective rooms. As she settled into the small bed, Elena held the pillow tightly, taking a deep breath. She thought about the letters, the photographs, and the brief conversations with James. She realized that, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the new challenges, there was something comforting about the honesty she had already begun to feel between them. Meanwhile, James sat in his living room, staring out at the darkened fields. He reflected on the day, the initial awkwardness, the small moments of connection, the shared laughter, and the quiet conversations. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of anticipation about what tomorrow might bring. He knew the journey would not be easy. There would be misunderstandings, cultural differences, and challenges he had never faced before. But there was also potential for companionship, understanding, and perhaps something deeper, something meaningful. As the house settled into silence, both James and Alina experienced a similar mix of excitement and nervousness. They had taken the first steps into a life together, unsure of what the future held but aware that this night, this first encounter, had already shifted something inside them. The letters had brought them together, but the day had turned those words and photographs into a real, living connection. And as the stars shone quietly over the ranch, a sense of possibility hung in the air. Tomorrow, they would begin learning about each other more fully. Tomorrow, they would face the first small tests of trust and compatibility. And tomorrow, their lives, which had been so separate until now, would start to intertwine in ways neither could yet imagine. The house had finally grown quiet, with only the soft hum of the night wind brushing against the windows. James had been tidying up the kitchen, putting away the dishes from their simple dinner, when he realized how tense he felt. It wasn't tension born of worry or anger, but a nervous anticipation. Alina was now his guest, his new wife, and yet she still felt like a stranger. How would the night go? Would she find comfort in this new home in him? He sighed quietly, rubbing his hands together, trying to calm the nervous energy he didn't know how to release. Alina, in her small bedroom, lay on the neatly made bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint creaking of the house settling and the distant sound of animals in the barn. She hugged the pillow to her chest and let her thoughts wander. Everything was new: the country, the ranch, James himself. 1,000 questions raced through her mind. Could she adjust to this life? Could she be the partner James hoped she would be? Could she truly belong here? She had left her home, her family, and her familiar world behind, and now she was standing on the edge of a life that was as frightening as it was full of possibility. After a few moments, she realized she couldn't stay silent anymore. She needed to speak her mind, to release the tension that had been building inside her since her arrival. Gathering courage, she stood and quietly opened the door. James, still in the kitchen, looked up at the soft knock. "Yes?" he asked gently. She stepped inside, her eyes cast downward, hands fidgeting slightly. I wanted to speak with you," she said softly. James nodded, motioning for her to sit. "Of course, Alina. What is it?" She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am nervous," she admitted. I did not know what to expect. I wanted to do everything right to make you happy, but I am afraid I may fail." James's heart softened. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the vulnerability in her posture. This was not someone pretending or putting on a front. This was a young woman far from home, trying her best to adapt and be honest. He gestured for her to sit more comfortably. "Alina," he said gently, "you don't need to worry about being perfect. You've been brave enough to come here, to leave everything familiar behind. That courage already means a lot." She nodded, biting her lower lip, tears threatening to spill. "I wanted to tell you I am shy. I do not know how to be a good wife. I am afraid I may disappoint you. I do not want to cause trouble or sadness." Her confession was quiet, but it filled the room with a weight that was both emotional and real. James felt a pang of empathy. She was not trying to manipulate or test him. She was offering her heart in its purest, most honest form. James took a deep breath and sat beside her, careful not to overwhelm her with sudden closeness. "Alina, listen to me," he said softly. "I am not looking for perfection. I am looking for honesty. For someone who is willing to grow with me, who is willing to share life, the hard days and the good ones. You have already shown me that you are willing, and that is more than enough for now." She looked at him, eyes glistening, and allowed herself to relax slightly. You are not angry," she whispered. James shook his head gently. "No, Alina, there is no anger, only understanding. I know this is hard. I know it is new for you just as it is new for me. But that is what life is sometimes, learning, adapting, and trusting each other along the way." There was a long silence as they sat together, the quiet of the night surrounding them. Alina's hands, once tightly clenched, now rested on her lap. James noticed her trembling slightly, not from fear but from relief and release. She had shared her fears, and instead of judgment she had found understanding. That moment, fragile as it was, became the beginning of something deeper. I have never spoken so openly before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not know if I could." James smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "It is not easy," he said gently, "but honesty is always worth it. And I am glad you trusted me with it." They began to talk more freely after that. Alina shared small stories about her childhood, the simple joys she had known, and the fears she had carried. James listened carefully, asking questions when appropriate, but mostly giving her space to speak. He shared stories from his own past too, not just about life on the ranch, but about the small regrets, the quiet moments of joy, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Slowly, the awkwardness that had hung over the evening began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative sense of connection. Hours passed as they spoke softly in the living room. They laughed together quietly at small jokes, found common ground in simple preferences, and even shared moments of comfortable silence where words were not needed. James began to notice the little details, the way Alina's eyes lit up when she mentioned something she loved, the careful way she listened, and the small, shy gestures that revealed her personality. She was learning about him and he was learning about her, and in that learning, trust began to form. Alina eventually admitted she felt homesick. She missed her family and the familiarity of her previous life. James listened patiently, acknowledging her feelings. "It is natural to miss home," he said. "It does not make you weak, it makes you human, and you are allowed to feel that way even here." She nodded, her lips pressed together as if trying to hold back tears. But this time, the tears were not from fear, they were from relief, from knowing that she could be herself without judgment. James suggested that they take a small walk outside under the stars before going to bed. The night air was cool and filled with the gentle sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cows, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind, and the faint creak of the barn doors. Alina followed him quietly, her hand brushing slightly against his as they walked. It was a small gesture, almost accidental, but it carried the weight of trust and budding familiarity. They stopped near the fence that overlooked the pasture. James pointed out the stars and the constellations he had learned as a child. Alina listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the patterns and stories behind them. James noticed how her eyes sparkled with curiosity, how her nervousness seemed to fade in the presence of something as simple and timeless as the night sky. For a long moment they stood together quietly, not needing words. There was an understanding between them, a sense that this first night, filled with honesty and openness, had set a foundation for something real. Alina turned to him and said softly, "Thank you for listening. For not judging me." James shook his head gently. "No thanks needed, you did the right thing, you were honest, and that is the most important thing." Eventually, they returned to the house. Alina prepared for bed, still feeling nervous but more at ease than when she had first arrived. James returned to his own room, reflecting on the night. He realized that the shy, quiet woman who had arrived earlier in the day was already becoming more than just a guest. She was someone he could trust, someone whose honesty had already begun to change his perspective. For the first time in years, he felt a quiet excitement about what the future might hold. As the house settled into complete silence, both James and Alina lay awake for a little while, thinking about the day, the conversations, and the confessions. They had shared their fears, their hopes, and a glimpse of their true selves. And in doing so, they had planted the seeds of trust, understanding, and a connection that neither had expected but both felt quietly growing. The first night had been awkward, uncertain, and full of nervous energy. Yet by the end, it had transformed into a night of quiet revelations, honest communication, and a fragile but promising beginning. The future was still unknown, full of challenges and learning, but for the first time, both of them felt that perhaps this journey could lead to something meaningful. As the stars shone outside the small windows of the ranch house, James and Alina drifted off to sleep, each holding a small sense of hope and anticipation. They had faced the first test of honesty and vulnerability, and both had passed. The night's confessions, soft words, and quiet understanding would linger in their minds, guiding them as they took the next steps toward building a life together. And somewhere in the stillness of the ranch, under the wide Texas sky, a silent promise began to form, a promise that they would face the challenges ahead together, with honesty, patience, and a willingness to learn about each other every day. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the wide fields of the ranch, spilling golden light across the pasture and warming the wooden fences. James woke early, as usual, and prepared breakfast while listening to the faint sounds of birds chirping and the distant lowing of cows. He glanced toward Alina's room, wondering if she had slept well. The first night had been quiet and emotional, and he knew that today would be the true test of their ability to live and work together. Alina emerged from her room a little later, moving cautiously across the floor. She had chosen a simple dress and tied her hair back neatly. When she saw James setting the table, she hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Good morning, James." He smiled warmly. "Good morning, Alina. I hope you slept well." She nodded, a small smile crossing her face. "Yes, thank you. The bed is very comfortable." Breakfast was a quiet but pleasant affair. They ate simple food, scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit, but there was a growing sense of ease between them. Alina asked questions about the daily routine, wanting to understand what her life would be like on the ranch. James explained how the mornings often began early with feeding the animals and checking the fences, and how the afternoons were spent tending to chores and repairs. Alina listened carefully, absorbing every detail, her eyes wide with curiosity and a hint of determination. After breakfast, James suggested that Alina join him in the chores. He knew it would be difficult for her at first, but he wanted her to understand the rhythm of ranch life. "We can start slowly," he said, "just the basics. You do not need to do everything perfectly today." Alina nodded, grateful for his patience, and followed him outside. Their first task was feeding the animals. James showed her how to carry the buckets of feed, how to approach the cattle carefully, and how to pour the grain without startling them. Alina tried her best, her movements cautious at first, but gradually becoming more confident. She laughed softly when a curious calf nudged her hand, and James smiled, impressed by her calm demeanor. It was clear she was willing to learn, even if she stumbled a few times. Next, they moved on to checking the fences. James demonstrated how to inspect each post and wire, looking for weaknesses or damage. Alina followed his instructions carefully, asking questions when she wasn't sure. She made a few mistakes, but James corrected her gently, showing her the right way without making her feel embarrassed. With each passing hour, she grew more capable and confident, and James began to see the quiet strength she had hidden behind her shyness. As the morning wore on, they began to talk more freely. Alina asked about James' life before the ranch, about his family, and even about his late wife. James answered honestly but without dwelling on painful memories, sharing small stories that revealed his personality, his values, and his sense of humor. Alina listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally laughing quietly. The shared work and conversation began to create a rhythm, a sense of partnership that neither had expected so soon. By midday, the sun was high, and both felt the need for a short break. They sat on the porch, sipping cold water and watching the animals move through the fields. Alina admitted she was tired but happy. "It is hard work," she said softly, "but I think I can learn. It is different from my life at home, but I like it here." James felt a warmth spread through him. Her words were simple, but they carried sincerity and commitment. He realized that her willingness to try, to adapt, and to embrace this new life was one of her greatest strengths. The afternoon brought new challenges. James had planned for her to help with some small repairs around the barn. They carried tools together, measured wooden planks, and fixed loose boards. Alina struggled at first, unsure how to use the hammer and nails properly, but she persisted. James offered guidance without impatience, showing her how to hold the tools, how to measure accurately, and how to work efficiently. She listened carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration, determined not to make mistakes. During a brief moment of rest, Alina turned to James. "I feel clumsy," she admitted quietly. "I do not want to make mistakes." James shook his head gently. "Alina, making mistakes is part of learning. No one expects you to be perfect." "You are doing very well." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you for being patient with me." James smiled. "Always, that is what matters. We are learning together." As the day progressed, they found themselves laughing at small mishaps, the hammer slipping slightly, a plank being placed backward, or a bucket tipping over. The laughter broke the tension and made the work more enjoyable. Alina's initial shyness began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. James, too, found himself relaxing in her presence, appreciating her thoughtful approach to learning and her willingness to embrace the challenges of ranch life. By late afternoon, they had completed the tasks planned for the day. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting a warm glow over the ranch. James suggested they take a short break before preparing dinner. They sat on the porch again, drinking water and watching the golden light reflect off the fields. Alina leaned back, taking a deep breath, and said softly, "I am tired, but I am happy. I think I can do this life with you." James felt a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. Her words, though simple, carried a quiet promise of commitment and trust. That evening, they cooked dinner together. Alina learned how to prepare some simple dishes, guided by James' patient instructions. They chopped vegetables, stirred pots, and shared stories about their past experiences. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of cooking food, laughter, and the easy conversation that comes from shared effort. Alina realized that life on the ranch was not just about hard work. It was about connection, teamwork, and small joys. James, in turn, appreciated her willingness to try, her careful attention, and her growing confidence. After dinner, they cleaned up together, sharing small smiles and quiet jokes. Alina admitted that she was proud of herself for having completed the day's tasks, despite her initial fears. James reassured her, saying that every day would bring new challenges, but that they would face them together. The sense of partnership was growing stronger, built on patience, honesty, and mutual respect. Later, as the night fell, James suggested they take a walk around the ranch before bedtime. The evening air was cool and calm, filled with the gentle sounds of nocturnal animals and the whisper of the wind through the trees. They walked side by side, talking softly about their plans for the coming days, the chores that needed attention, and the small joys they hoped to share. Alina's confidence had grown, and she moved more freely, no longer hesitant at every step. At one point, Alina stopped and looked out over the fields. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "Even though it is very different from my home, I feel peaceful." James nodded, feeling the same quiet peace that she described. "That is what I love about this place," he said. "It is hard work, yes, but it gives you space to think, to reflect, and to enjoy small moments like this." As they returned to the house, James realized how much had changed in just a single day. Alina had arrived shy, nervous, and uncertain, but by working together, talking honestly, and sharing experiences, they had begun to form a bond. She had shown resilience, patience, and a willingness to learn, and he had shown understanding, guidance, and encouragement. Their connection was growing, built on trust and shared effort rather than superficial words or appearances. Before going to bed, they sat quietly for a few moments on the porch, watching the stars appear in the clear Texas sky. Alina reached out tentatively and brushed her hand against James. He did not pull away, understanding the silent communication between them. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized a growing trust and a willingness to face the challenges of life together. That night, as Alina prepared for bed, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had learned new skills, adapted to unfamiliar tasks, and discovered that she was capable of more than she had imagined. The day had been exhausting, but it had also been rewarding. She realized that living on the ranch was not just about physical labor. It was about learning to rely on each other, to communicate honestly, and to find joy in small successes. James, lying in his own bed, reflected on the day as well. He had been cautious at first, worried about how Alina would handle the realities of ranch life. But he had been pleasantly surprised. She was capable, thoughtful, and willing to learn. More importantly, she was willing to trust him and allow herself to be guided without fear or resentment. He felt a quiet excitement for the days ahead, knowing that this partnership, though new and unconventional, held great promise. By the end of the day, both James and Alina had grown a little closer, not just as husband and wife, but as partners, learning to navigate the challenges and rewards of a life shared together. The first real steps of trust, respect, and understanding had been taken, setting the stage for the deeper emotional connection that would continue to grow in the days and weeks to come. And as the ranch settled into silence for the night, under the wide expanse of stars, a sense of hope lingered in the air. Both James and Alina knew that life together would not always be easy, but they also knew that by facing each day honestly, patiently, and together, they could build something meaningful, a partnership founded on trust, care, and the shared effort of life on the ranch. The morning light spilled gently across the ranch, waking James to the familiar sounds of birds and cattle. But this morning felt different. He stretched, feeling a quiet excitement that he hadn't felt in years. Yesterday had been a long, exhausting day filled with work, learning, and small victories, and yet it had brought something far more important, a deeper connection with Alina. For the first time, he realized that this life, his life, was no longer just his own. It belonged in a small but growing way to both of them. Alina, already awake, stood by the window, watching the cows graze in the early morning light. She breathed deeply, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. Life on the ranch was still new and challenging, but she felt a sense of belonging she had never expected. She thought about the past few days, the arrival, the confessions, the work, the laughter, and the quiet moments under the stars. Slowly, it all came together in her mind. This was not just a temporary stay. This could be her life, a life she could embrace fully, with James as a partner, guide, and friend. After a simple breakfast, James suggested they check on the new fencing along the pasture. It was a task that required focus and teamwork, and he knew it would be the perfect way for them to continue building trust. Alina followed him with determination, carrying her tools carefully. She had learned much in the past days, yet she knew there would always be more to discover. James admired her quiet focus, the way she approached each task thoughtfully, and the small smiles she allowed herself when she accomplished something successfully. The morning passed with laughter and light conversation. Alina asked about the land, about the cattle, and about James' childhood on the ranch. He answered openly, telling stories of early mornings with his father, learning to ride horses, and helping with chores as a boy. Alina listened intently, occasionally laughing at small mishaps he recounted, occasionally nodding thoughtfully. Their shared work and conversation began to create a rhythm, a silent understanding that extended beyond words. Midday brought a challenge they had not anticipated. A sudden call of distress came from one of the fields. A young calf had become stuck in a ditch near the edge of the pasture. James and Alina rushed to the scene, finding the animal struggling but unharmed. James directed Alina to fetch ropes while he stabilized the calf. Alina's hands shook slightly, but she followed his instructions carefully. Together, they managed to free the calf, both of them breathing heavily but smiling with relief. "That was intense," Alina said, wiping sweat from her forehead. James laughed softly. "It's part of ranch life. Unexpected things happen and we learn to handle them together." Alina nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. She realized that by facing challenges side by side, they were learning to trust each other not just in work, but in life. She could rely on James and he could rely on her, and that realization filled her with a quiet joy. After the excitement of the rescue, they took a short break, sitting on the porch with water bottles in hand. The afternoon sun was warm and the ranch seemed calm again. Alina spoke quietly about her family back home, expressing both love and longing. James listened carefully, offering gentle reassurance. "It is natural to miss home," he said softly. "But it is also natural to find a place here, a place where you can build something new." Alina nodded, appreciating his understanding. She realized that life with James was not just about adapting to a new routine, but about creating a shared life built on patience, respect, and mutual care. As the day wore on, James suggested they work together on a small project inside the barn. They organized tools, cleaned the stalls, and mended some minor damage to the walls. Alina had grown more skilled and confident, moving with a steady rhythm that impressed James. He noticed how her quiet determination had replaced the initial shyness, how her hands moved with purpose, and how her mind was attentive to detail. Every small success strengthened the bond between them. That evening, after a hearty dinner, James suggested a walk around the ranch to enjoy the sunset. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting in the calm waters of the nearby pond. They walked side by side, occasionally pointing out small details, flowers blooming along the fence, a pair of deer in the distance, the soft sounds of the wind through the trees. Alina's hand brushed against James lightly, not by accident but with a quiet sense of trust and comfort. "You know," Alina said softly, "I did not think I could feel at home here so quickly, but now I think I could." James smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "It takes time, Alina, but you are brave, patient, and willing to learn. That is why you fit in so well already." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the sunset. "I want to be part of this life," she said quietly. "Not just live here, but belong here." "With you." James felt a lump in his throat, realizing that her words were more than a declaration of effort. They were a promise, a willingness to share life honestly and openly. "Alina," he said gently, "I want that too. Life can be hard and it can be unexpected, but with honesty and patience, we can face it together." She nodded, smiling softly. The trust and understanding between them had grown deeper than words could describe. The rest of the evening was spent preparing for the next day. Alina helped James clean the barn and arrange tools for easier access, showing initiative and thoughtfulness. James noticed how much effort she was putting in, how much she cared, and he felt an increasing respect and admiration for her. She was no longer just the shy, nervous woman who had arrived days earlier. She was now a partner, a companion, and someone whose presence brought warmth and hope to his life. Later, as they finally settled inside the house, Alina confided more personal thoughts. She admitted that she had once feared she might fail at this new life, that she might never fit in or be accepted. James listened, nodding, offering quiet encouragement. "You have nothing to fear now," he said gently. "You are doing more than well. You are learning, growing, and showing that you can be trusted. That is all anyone could hope for." Alina smiled, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment she had not expected to feel so soon. Before heading to bed, James suggested one final walk around the porch to enjoy the quiet night. The stars shone brightly, and the air was calm and refreshing. They walked slowly, side by side, speaking softly about small hopes and plans for the future. Alina expressed her desire to continue learning, to help more with the ranch work, and to grow alongside him. James felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that she had embraced this life fully, not out of obligation, but out of choice. As the night deepened, they returned inside. Alina prepared for bed, feeling both tired and satisfied. James watched her quietly, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. They had faced challenges, learned together, laughed together, and built trust. For the first time, he felt that their future could be bright, even in the simplicity and unpredictability of ranch life. Finally, they both lay in their separate rooms, reflecting on the past days. Alina felt proud of herself, realizing that she had adapted, learned, and contributed meaningfully to their shared life. James felt a quiet happiness, knowing that he had found a partner who could face life honestly, patiently, and with care. Their bond had grown beyond letters and photographs into something living, tangible, and hopeful. As sleep began to take them both, a sense of calm certainty filled the house. They had taken the first steps toward a shared life that was not built on appearances, but on honesty, effort, and mutual respect. The challenges ahead would continue, but they were no longer facing them alone. Together, they had discovered the simple truth that trust, patience, and understanding could form the foundation of a lasting partnership. In the quiet of the night, with stars twinkling overhead and the gentle sounds of the ranch around them, a new chapter in their lives began. One that promised connection, growth, and hope. One that showed that even in the most unexpected circumstances, meeting a shy mail-order bride, facing fears and uncertainties, life could offer companionship, trust, and the beginning of something beautiful. And in that quiet stillness, both James and Alina knew that the journey they had begun would continue with honesty, patience, and shared effort, bringing them closer together every day.